Hello, neighbors. Glad you're here today. Happy Mother's Day, moms, and glad to be able to celebrate with you here today. And I am thankful for my mom. She's quite a lady. Here's a couple of things she taught me growing up. If something bad was happening in my life, she would say, "Well, you can either live or die." That was her advice to me. I was about as comforting as the God. You can either live or die. You want to get over it or not? All right. Then she would also say this when there was things I didn't want to do. She says, well, sometimes you do things you don't want to do. Again, not much comfort in all those things. I was just like, oh, well, yeah, okay. Great godly woman who continues to amaze me with her faith and her generosity. Loves to teach the Bible and teaches a class for women at her little church in Brownville, Nebraska, and loves teaching and sharing the Word of God. Appreciate a lot her influence in my life. Appreciate my kid's mom as well. Linda's here this morning at service, and again, similar traits except more compassion mostly. Loves her kids a lot and loves the Lord and loves to teach that as well. Appreciate that as well. We're starting this message series last weekend on loving your neighbor as you love yourself, and it's it's the second commandment that Jesus gives us. Last weekend we started off, which was basically how can I love my neighbor if I don't love myself, right? And so we discovered that through Jesus and the gift that He's given us, we can love ourselves because He loves us before we could even love Him. And so today we're going to take a look at, well then, okay, how do I love my neighborhood? And we'll try to figure that out. Now, I used to play a lot of golf. When I was a kid, I loved golf. I worked at a golf course. I was pretty sure that somehow I would find my way into the PGA or at least be a club pro. And that's true. You would not know that now looking at how I swing a golf club. In fact, this week, tomorrow, I'm going to play golf for the first time in a couple of years, I suppose. I haven't played golf for a while. I got a call from a friend of mine, and he says, hey, I'd like you and Mitch to be on my golf team. My son's playing, and we're playing in this benefit tournament for Nebraska Christian College, and I paid for it, and would you want to play? And I said, well, where's it at? He says, well, it's Quarry Oaks. I said, Well, just so you know, I said, Mitch is terrible. He's terrible. I can't even tell you how bad he is. And he said, oh, he's not that bad. I said, no. He's terrible. And he said, well, he can't be there. I said, no, he does not know how to play golf. And I said, but I will check with him. And, I mean, if you really want him to play. So I say, Mitch, hey, Don would like us to play on his golf team. He's like, why? I said, well, they're doing this benefit. He's already paid for it. And he goes, did you tell him I don't know how to golf? I said, I told him you were terrible. And so he says, well, how many holes is it? Like 9? I said, it's 18. 18? I don't know. I said, well, let me know what you think in the morning or something. We'll figure it out. So he said, okay, I'll play. So we agreed to play, and so this afternoon we have to go to Walmart to buy golf balls. We don't have enough, I'm sure. Now, I used to like to play. I love the challenge. I like the strategy. I love the smell of fresh cut grass. And what I really loved most of all was hitting the sweet spot. When you take that club back and you move through it and you hit the sweet spot, there's nothing like it. In fact, you can't even tell that you hit the ball. It's just so nice. And the ball goes far, goes high. It does exactly what you had hoped for and you had envisioned. When you hit the sweet spot, it's almost like it takes no effort at all. It's an incredible thing. I'm pretty sure that most of our ministry efforts are 98% of all our ministry efforts happen in a very small little place in our lives. Most of the ministry efforts, most of the times when we're reaching out for people and helping them find a way to God, it really is in a little bit of a space in our lives. It's usually with our family and with our close friends. That's the ministry sweet spot. And when we swing hard during those moments, and there's certain moments in our lives when it's just like the perfect opportunity. When we decide to swing hard at those moments, people draw near to God. Unfortunately, at times, we don't swing hard. We've just kind of given up. We've tried, but today I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities that we have to love our neighborhood, to engage in conversations where we can love people. It's in our everyday life that this happens. 1 Corinthians 16:9. Well, let me back up. Colossians 4:5. Sorry, guys. Live wisely among those who are not believers and make the most of every opportunity. I think it does imply that at times we as Christ followers have not lived among our close friends and our family in a wisely way. In fact, we've been unwise. In fact, I would even say that we have been unchristian oftentimes. Most Christ followers outside our walls today, most people think that Christians are judgmental, racist, bigots, and we've given the impression that we don't care, we don't, our world can go to wherever, right? So we've got to live as wise. 2 Corinthians 16:9. There is a wide open door for great work here, although many oppose me. There's a wide open door for us. Jesus told a story about a guy who had been beaten and left for dead. And then a religious guy, a priest, comes walking by and sees him and ignores him. I don't like telling this story because the religious people don't do well. Another religious guy comes walking by, sees him, ignores him, goes on by. And then a Samaritan. In fact, the Bible would even say a dreaded Samaritan or a hated Samaritan sees the man, looks at him, and takes care of his needs. He does something about it. I mentioned Linda. Linda's very good at these kind of things where she can see a need where I just tend to like, whatever. We can be with a group of people, I can have a great time, and we're driving home, and she'll say something like this, well, that was awkward. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? I said, I had a great time. She's like, well, did you notice that she didn't even really look at him the whole night? I think there's something wrong there. I said, all I noticed was we ran out of Dr. Pepper. That was awkward, I thought, but... And then she just senses there's some pain involved in their lives. Instead of just ignoring that, she can take care of that. Most of us really started back on our journey to God because of pain. Rarely did we go, oh, hey, my job's great, my kids are great, I just hit the lottery twice, let's go to church. No, it's usually when things have bottomed out, when we've gone through a divorce or maybe a death in the family, or we got some pretty bad news at the doctor, or we lost our job, when we decided, I can't do this, I can't figure it out, that we made our way back to God. And it was usually because somebody stepped into that pain in our lives and said, hey, you know what, I know you're going through a difficult time. I'm kind of where you were a few years ago. I started going to church. It's made all the difference in the world to me. It's made all the difference. 2 Corinthians 7:10. For God can use sorrow in our lives to help us turn away from sin and seek salvation. Perhaps that is even the purpose that when pain and sorrow comes into our lives, it's a moment for when we can turn back to God. When a person has pain, instead of saying, well, I wish I could help you, but I got to go to church, we should probably say, maybe we're even on our way to church, but we should say, well, I need to stop and I need to help. It's the sweet spot. Here at Stonebridge, we even have great resources for people who are going through difficult times, from marriage counseling to help with addictions and struggles that we have. In fact, tonight we have a group called Celebrate Recovery. They're going to meet tonight. I know it's Mother's Day, but they meet every Sunday night. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's Christmas or Christmas Eve or Mother's Day. In fact, it's oftentimes in those moments, in those painful, even holidays, in which people need help the most. So even here tonight at 7 o'clock, after our 6 o'clock service, there will be people meeting here to help them through some of the pain in their lives. There's another sweet spot. Not only is it kind of pain that happens, but this other one as well. King David experienced it. Zacchaeus experienced, the woman who was caught in an affair experienced it. Psalm 38:4. My guilt overwhelms me. It is a burden too heavy to bear. Plain old guilt. Some people carry around an enormous amount of guilt and pain from the struggles they face in their lives. Kay Arthur tells her husband, go ahead and commit suicide. I could use the money. And he did. And she said it was a turning point in her life. She gave her life over to Christ. You see it all the time. Moms and dads carrying around parenting regrets. As wonderful a day as this can be for moms, it can also be a day of regret, of struggles from kids who've gone wayward to being a neglectful person and maybe abusive, and guilt comes running in. We can also see it because of maybe unfaithfulness, unwise spending, financial regrets, and guilt, and huge load. And we can step into that. Because I know a guy who can forgive all that guilt and move it away from us. He never rubs it in. He always rubs it out. There's another sweet spot, not only in pain, but in guilt, but also in boredom. In fact, I would say that that's probably one of the biggest issues that people in our community face is just boredom. They have a great job, they're making more money than they can spend, have a great wife, 2 nice kids, a dog, and that dog doesn't even bark. And you're having barbecue with them. And he says to you, I don't know why I feel this way, but I'm bored. I don't need one more money. I don't need one more deal. One more boat's not going to do it for me. Not one more cabin in the mountains is not going to make it for me. And why do you think that Jesus' followers, some of them, when he said, hey, I want you to put down these fishing nets and come follow me, do you think it was just because, I don't think it was because they were bad fishermen. And they're, oh, sweet, I don't have to do this anymore. I think they were just bored with their life. One more boatload of fish isn't going to do it for them. One more boatload of money wasn't going to do them. What was going to do it for them was making a difference in the world. And they were called to be world changers, not just people who fish for a living. And I've talked with too many people and businessmen and women who have said, you know what, if I could just, I'd chuck it all if I could. Make a difference for Jesus. In fact, some of the leading pastors in our world today came out of the marketplace because they were bored with their life and decided, you know what, I think I can make a difference just in being a pastor. And they're leading great churches. Perhaps there's people in your life that are dealing with that, and while it might be pain and guilt, but it also might be boredom, and they recognize their need for God. They're wanting to figure out, what is there more to life than just this? These are doors, folks, into our neighbor's life that we can step into. So what does a person who's going through enormous pain need? What does a person who's going through dealing with enormous amount of guilt need? What does a person who is super bored with life need? Well, I'll tell you what they don't need. They probably don't need a Bible study. I know you're going through a difficult time when I come to a Bible study with me. I mean, they're like, what? No, I don't. No. What they do need is understanding. They need acceptance. Jesus had this amazing ability to step into people's pain, step into people's guilt, and step into people's boredom in their lives and accept them just where they were. And that was irresistible to people. Nobody had ever treated them that way. He was without sin, you know. I mean, he was Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. If anybody was going to be awkward at a dinner party, it would have been people around Jesus. But they were not bothered by his presence even at a big party. They were drawn to him. Why? Because he would accept them. You know, one of the best ways to accept people is just to listen. Listening always opens doors. It doesn't close them. And I think it's kind of weird that Jesus would listen to people, right? I mean, you think about it. Because he already knew what they were going to say. I think he would have said, I don't have time for this. Just go do this. Well, I didn't even tell you. I know it, but I know what you're going to say, so. No, he still spent time listening to people. Yeah, but what if they ask me tough questions? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the Bible. I don't know what to say. I don't know. You should talk to them. And I always tell people, no, you should talk to them. I don't know them. You talk to them. They're your neighbors. They're your co-workers. You talk to them. Well, what if I don't have the answers? Well, here, I'm going to give you 3 words to use when you don't have the answers to people who are going through difficult times. And you can write them down, but you won't even have to write them down because you'll be able to remember this. So when somebody asks you a tough question and you don't have the answer to it, you just say this: I don't know. I don't know. That's brilliant, I know, but that's all you have to say. I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know what that is. But tell you what, I'm going to try to find the answer to that. And so after the conversation's over, you go home and you talk to maybe your small group leader. Maybe you call up one of our pastors here on staff and just say, you know what, I got to ask this. I have no idea what to do. What should be my next step, or what answers can I give? And then you call that person up a week or so later and say, you know what, here's what I found. Would you like to get together at Starbucks? I'd love to talk with you a little bit about some of the stuff that I found out. That's all you have to do. Acceptance and understanding. I mentioned acceptance last week. I heard from several people about that because of some of the questions we were dealing with last weekend. And oftentimes we think that acceptance means that I agree with, or that I have to compromise, or validate. I have to validate what you've been doing or thinking or are part of. Acceptance simply means understanding. I want to read a little bit of an article. Actually, I want to read most of it, and I usually don't do this, but it's kind of long, so I want you to hang in here with me. It's written by a guy named Shane Windmeyer. You may have never even heard of Shane, but here's the article that he writes, and he calls it Dan and Me, My Coming Out as a Friend of Dan Cathy and Chick-fil-A. Dan is the COO of Chick-fil-A. He writes, I spent New Year's Eve at the red-blooded All-American epicenter of college football, the Chick-fil-A Bowl, next to Dan Cathy as his personal guest. It was among the most unexpected moments of my life. After months of personal phone calls, text messages, and in-person meetings, I'm coming out. I'm coming out in a new way as a friend of Chick-fil-A's president and COO Dan Cathy, and I'm very nervous about it. I have come to know him and Chick-fil-A in ways that I would never thought possible when I first started hearing about the LGBT students and their concerns over the Chick-fil-A's chains and giving practices. For many, this news of friendship might be shocking. After all, I'm a 40-year-old man. I'm a 40-year-old gay man with a lifelong activist for equality. I'm also the founder and the executive director of Campus Pride, the leading national organization for lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgendered students. Just 7 months ago, our organization advanced a national campaign against Chick-fil-A for the millions of dollars it has donated to anti-LGBT organizations. I have spent quite some time being angry and deeply distrustful of Dan Cathy and Chick-fil-A. If he had his way, my husband of 18 years would never be legally, and I would never be legally married. Why was I now standing next to him at one of the most popular football showdowns? How could I dare think to have a relationship with a man and a company that has advocated against who I am? Who would take apart my family in the name of traditional marriage, whose voice and views represent the exact opposite of those of the students for whom I advocate on every single day? Dan is the problem. Chick-fil-A is the enemy, right? Like most LGBT people, I was provoked by Dan's public opposition to marriage equality and his company's problematic giving history. I had the background and the history on him, so I thought, and I had my own preconceived notions about who he was. I knew his character. No way did he know me. That was my view, but it was a flawed view. For nearly a decade now, my organization, Campus Pride, has been on the ground with students leading protests at Chick-fil-A campuses across the country. I had researched Chick-fil-A's giving of over $5 million in funding since 2003 to anti-LGBT groups. And the whole nation was aware that Dan was guilty as charged in his support of biblical definition of marriage. What more is there to know? But on August 10th, 2012, in the heat of our controversy, I got a surprise call from Dan Cathy. He had gotten my phone number from a business associate. I took the call with great caution. He was going to tear me apart, so I thought, give me a piece of his mind, turn his lawyers on me. The first call lasted for over an hour, and the private conversation led to more calls in the next week and the next week. Dan Cathy knew how to text, and he would reach out to me, and new questions came to his mind. This was not going to be a typical turn of events. His questions and series of deeper conversations ultimately led to a number of in-person meetings with Dan and his representatives from Chick-fil-A. He had never before had a dialogue with any member of the LGBT community. It was awkward at times, but genuine and kind. It's not often that people with deeply held and completely opposing viewpoints actually risk sitting down and listening to one another. We see this failure to listen and learn in our government and in our communities and our own families. Dan, Kathy, and I would together try to do better than each of us had experienced before. Never once did Dan or anyone from Chick-fil-A ask for Campus Pride to stop protesting. On the contrary, Dan listened intently to our concerns and the real-life accounts from youth about the negative impact that Chick-fil-A was having on campus climate and safety at colleges across the country. He was concerned about an incident last fall where a fraternity was tabling next to the Chick-fil-A restaurant on campus. Whenever an out gay student on campus would walk by the table, the frat would yell, "We love Chick-fil-A," and then shout anti-gay slurs at the student. Dan sought first to understand and not to be understood. He confessed that he had been naive to the issues at hand and the unintended impact of his company's practices. Chick-fil-A also provided access to internal documents relating to the funding and asked questions about our concerns related to it as well. Through all this, Dan and I shared respectful, enduring communication and built trust. His demeanor has always been one of kindness and openness. Even when I continued to directly question his public actions and the funding decisions, Dan embraced the opportunity to have dialogue and to hear my perspective. He and I were committed to a better understanding of each other. Our mutual hope was to find common ground if possible and build respect no matter what. We learned about each other as people with opposing views, not as opposing people. During our meetings, they came to see that Chick-fil-A brand was being used by both sides of the aisle. The repercussions of this deep division and polarization now that was being fueled by hate on all sides. As a result, we agreed to keep the ongoing nature of our meetings private because the fire did not need more fuel. Throughout the conversations, Dan expressed a sincere interest in my life, wanting to get to know me on a personal level. He wanted to know about where I grew up, about my faith, about my family, about my husband. In return, I learned about his wife and his kids, gained an appreciation for his devout belief in Jesus Christ and his commitment to be a follower of Christ more than just being a Christian. Dan expressed regret and genuine sadness when he heard of people being treated unkindly in the name of his company, but offered no apologies for his genuine beliefs in marriage. And in all of that, we had great community. We were each entirely ourselves. We both wanted to be respectful for others to understand our views. Neither of us could or would change. It was not possible. We were different in dialogue, but that was progress. In many ways, getting to know Dan was better reminded me of my relationship with my uncle, who was a pastor in a Pentecostal church. When I came out openly in college as a gay man, I was aware that his religious views were not supportive of my homosexuality. But my personal relationship with my uncle reassured me of his love for me, and that love even extended to my husband. My uncle would never want to see any harm come to me or Tommy. His beliefs prevented him from fully reconciling what he understood as the immorality of homosexuality with the morality of loving and supporting me in my life. It was and remains an unsolvable riddle for him, the hating the sin and loving the sinner. My relationship with Dan is the same. Though he is not my family, Dan is in my heart, is driven by his desire to minister to others, and has chosen to continue our relationship through this controversy. We had to both hold to his beliefs and welcome me into them. He had to face the issue of respecting my viewpoints and life, even when not being able to reconcile them with his own belief system. He defined this to me as the blessing of growth. He had expanded his world without abandoning it. As Dan and I grew through this mutual dialogue and respect, he invited me to be his personal guest at the New Year's Eve Chick-fil-A Bowl. This was an event that Campus Pride and others had planned to protest. Had I been played, seduced into this billionaire's life? No. It was actually Dan who had taken the great risk of inviting me. He stood face to face with the ire of conservatives by being seen and photographed with an LGBT activist. He could have been portrayed as caving to the gay agenda by welcoming me. Instead, he stood next to me most of the night, putting respect ahead of fear. There we were on the sidelines, Dan, his wife and family and friends, and I enjoying the game. And that is why building a relationship with someone I thought I would never understood mattered. Our worlds, different as they could be, could coexist peacefully. The millions of college football fans watching that game never could have imagined what was playing out right in front of them: gay, straight, liberal, conservative, activist, evangelist. We could stand together in our difference and in our respect. How much better would our world be if we could all do the same? That is why, after discussions with Dan and Chick-fil-A, Campus Pride has suspended our campaign. Like Dan, we had faith. It just took time to prove it publicly. Now it is all about the future, one defined, let's hope, by continued mutual respect. I will not change my views, and Dan will likely not change his, but we can continue to listen, learn, and appreciate the blessings of growth that happens when we know each other better. I hope that our nation's political leaders and campus leaders might do the same. It's not about eating a certain kind of food or sandwich. It's not about sitting down at a table together and sharing our views as human beings engaged in real, respectful civil dialogue. Dan would call this the biblical definition of hospitality. I'd call it human decency. So long as we are all at the same table and talking, does it really matter what we call it or where we eat? I applaud Dan Cathy's living out his faith and finding understanding, because I think that Jesus would sit down with him and eat some chicken. For the most part, we dismiss things and we push away things. And we don't want to seek understanding, because that would mean I'd have to listen and I'd have to be, right? And it's so much easier not to do that. And so in this day in which we're trying to figure this all out, may we find the strength and the courage from our Lord Jesus Christ, who was able to do these things all the time. You see, there's some sweet spots out there, and I hope that you will swing for the fences this week. But when you're in conversation with somebody who's going through a difficult time, there's great pain or maybe sorrow, maybe even today. As wonderful as this day might be for some people, this is also an incredibly painful day. The loss of a mom or loss of a child. The pain of not being able to have a child. This is not easy. And so maybe even today, as you're talking with a family member or a friend, you might be able to experience a little bit about and help them just seek understanding in their pain and their guilt as well. All right, let's pray. God, here we are in this moment in time trying to be a good neighbor. You know, oftentimes we close our doors and we and build some pretty big walls, and we like our little neighborhood and don't venture too far out. And so here today, maybe perhaps would be a day in which we begin to see things the way you see them. When there's people in need, we'll stop and we'll help. We're going to do our best today. In Christ's name.